So, hey, Sean. Just to be true to the line we established, Lex, if you want to build on the last couple of speakers, feel free. Or the broader question is, can society get fully secular, where the majority of its citizens dispenses with any kind of supernatural, metaphysical beliefs about the nature of the world?
Yeah, great. I'm mostly listening, but I'd like to comment real quick that uh,
You're
I
quite
kind
Lex,
of,
faint.
yeah, your voice is pretty far away.
oh boy. Okay. Can you come back to me?
No, that's
It's
actually better.
Yeah, better now.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
I mean, we can
Let
though.
me
I'm
just
happy to go to Sean if you want
no. Let
to
me
sit
quickly
down.
comment if you can still hear me. Let me quickly comment that I'd like to challenge the idea that we've been kind of equating science with the secular. From my perspective, and this may be a longer discussion, I think the mysterious, the transcendent, even the religious can be found in science and in technology. From my perspective, science, we can get into where that can be discovered in science, but in technology, for me, the thing I'm most passionate about is artificial intelligence and the kind of mystery, the kind of meaning that we discover in stories we tell ourselves and myths and narratives that are religious in nature. I think could be discovered in the 21st century in technology. So I would caution, from my at least perspective, equating secularism with science and technology. But if it's okay, let me listen. I just wanted to add that quick comment.
Lex, can I ask you a follow-up question to that, if that's okay?
Alex, it's really difficult to hear you.
Can I ask a follow-up
If
question
you
to
could just
Lex?
if you could just let Sean go and fix your mic. It sounds like it's covered up.
All right. Yeah, Sean, all yours.
Hey everyone, I've really been enjoying this. It's yeah, going in all kinds of different directions. Okay, I've been studying kind of how humans think and problem solve and try and organize, and how that all that stuff that we've got going on in our minds, mostly unconscious, evolved. And I just can't get away from the fact that we all always have metaphysical commitments to all kinds of things all the time. Where, a metaphysical commitment is a willingness to kind of agree with others that there's some intangible, invisible thing that is actually causing this stuff. So, it's interesting. Popper kind of came up with his idea that the proper conduct of science to be effective had to make falsifiable conjectures, which could then be disproven. And he did that because he was hanging out with these people who were advocates of Freudianism and Adlerism and other kind of supposedly scientific theories. But every time they were confronted with something that appeared to everyone else to falsify their theory, they immediately said, oh, no, 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 our theory completely explains that as well. And so he kind of discovered that these couldn't be theories because they explained everything that ever came their way. But then he went on to point out that science seems to have this metaphysical commitment to the idea that every effect must have a cause or causes. I mean, if we have some effect and we fail to find cause, we don't kind of say, oh, we've falsified that. We say, well, keep looking. And so he kind of points out this very beautiful point that you can't really get anywhere unless you have metaphysical commitment. And, just a few examples of kind of things that we have metaphysical commitments to that I feel form powerful structures as powerful as religion. The idea that kind of free market capitalism built by democracy kind of is some kind of morally and ethically superior method, and when countries kind of have adventures overseas to kind of cause other people to be brought into this enlightened state, that's right, that's good. Or the idea that you go to Silicon Valley and you try and become a billionaire, and human good will be created as a side effect of your efforts to become a billionaire. Or the East Bay rationalist community, I believe, in my observation, definitely has metaphysical commitments to the notion that the way that they practice rationalism is a superior way to arrive at understanding and policies, and they're happy to kind of try to impose those on others. So I feel like there's no getting away from it, but in fact, religion, in quotes, is everywhere. And then, you can even see it in the structure of, scientific revolutions where everyone, it turned out, had a metaphysical commitment, like all the scientists, to kind of something like luminiferous ether or humor theory. And they were so certain that they were being scientific that they didn't notice that their metaphysical commitment was preventing them from kind of discovering the new explanation. So that's my kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, this is Sean. I really appreciated that. I just got a question that kind of ties into this slightly, and I personally would love to position this towards the scientists on the stage because we have at least three at this point. And I'd love to hear what Lex has to say. The question comes from Paul, and he asks, "Can you please ask where morality in a secular society comes from? Science is inherently neutral / non-moral, and tech may involve ethics. Its ethics doesn't come from science." So what do you think about that? This is something that I've thought about too, and I'd love to hear what the science people have to say.
Yeah, I mean, people like Paul Bloom look at the morality, and there's this thing that happened in the 1960s, which was the kind of evolutionary biologists trying to solve the problem of cooperation. Like, okay, the game theorists give this dire prediction that all human society is going to kind of collapse in a tragedy of the commons. But it turns out that you observe it and it just ain't so, like Eleanor Ostrom's work and so on. And so what's up? Like, how come we turn out to be altruistic in all kinds of ways? Well, they solved it by taking this gene-centered view of evolution and discovered that it's possible for reciprocal altruism to co-evolve as long as you also have tribalism and the desire to retaliate and revenge and being loyal or being cheaters and so on. And so the point is then that morality rides on top of all of that stuff, the good and the bad. And there's kind of no getting away from it. And so, if we want to step back and take, let's say, a Rawlsian view, we have to recognize that we are kind of trying to be a little more, trying to pretend that we can be more enlightened and moral at the same time. But, in a sense, I don't think we can. I mean, we're hardwired with so much of this stuff that is going to make us kind of believe things very deeply. And, motivated reasoning is such a powerful force that it's kind of, it's an endlessly tricky terrain to navigate.
I'll speak to this really quickly. Sean said a lot of what I would say in outline. So he alluded to the problem of altruism. This is what W.D. Hamilton, biologist who died in year 2000, really accomplished guy, studies sex, evolution of sex and various other things. But he outlined the formal mathematics of inclusive fitness, which Sean alluded to, the kin selection. So there's various ways, obviously, you can explain altruism, like why you would, sacrifice yourself for others. Relatedness is clearly one. So Hamilton and John Maynard Smith and others worked at another one. Another theory is reciprocal altruism, which Sean alluded to, which basically you scratch my back, I scratch yours with iterated games. Hamilton and Axelrod extended this later. Trivers was the one who really pushed forward initially. So there's all sorts of ways you can explain this in a in a naturalistic way. Like, where does morality come from? Where do our moral intuitions come from? I do think that, there are some basic thin moral intuitions that are quite adaptive. So, for example, some of you might have read Steven Pinker's A Blank Slate, The Westermarck Effect. Why is sibling sexual relations generally nothing in most societies? Now, there are exceptions to this. We are a cultural species and we can overcome our intuitions. So ancient Egypt, Hawaii, with the royal family, there are other exceptions. But, it's from a geneticist perspective, I can tell you why, right? Like, the mutational load is high, the recessives get exposed, it's a bad life for the child.
Right.
Your fitness is lower. So that's the thin morality. But on top of that, there's more complex moralities, and we can start thinking about it and reasoning it. So, for example, what if two siblings love each other and they say that they're going to get sterilized? Should we allow that marriage? I mean, this is the question. This is actually something that's a live issue right now. There are philosophers who are addressing it. And so on top of the thin morality of the core morality of, So, for example, in Game of Thrones, I think
Yes, Cersei and Jamie.
yeah, there's stuff like that. But I mean, there's also other things in Game of Thrones where, like, kinslaying is like the ultimate crime. It's the ultimate sin. Why is it the ultimate sin? I mean, you can give an evolutionary explanation. This is common across a lot of societies. But there are also ethical frameworks that extend beyond that. So we go beyond tribal morality. We go beyond uh, clan morality. I alluded this to in the axial age. You have these philosophical systems that extended morality, that extended kin selection, inclusive fitness to like fictive kinship. So we are all brothers and sisters under God, under Christ, whatever. And Muslims say also brothers and sisters. And so, we can extend this logically in these cultural systems. And I think that there's also an element of cultural evolution, iteration, and cultural competition. So, Sean alluded to the individual gene centric view, which I think is actually where you have to start. But I am now convinced that we do need to go beyond the gene centric view insofar as um, certain types of moralities in the modern world are not as effective at scaling society. So think of like the tit for tat revenge moralities of the highlands of Albania and Montenegro. That just wouldn't work really well to create a modern society where you need rule of law. And if someone does something really bad to your relative, you may want to do an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but that that's probably not productive on some rational level, and society intervenes. So I think there are multiple layers of morality, just like there's multiple layers of religion. So a lot of people have strong religious intuitions. I have never had those strong religious intuitions, but I also know from talking to people and reading the literature that I am the exception, not the rule. But people don't stop at those religious intuitions. They have particular ideas about organized religions, metaphysical systems, philosophies. This is all layered on through cultural evolution. So I think we just start from the unit of the individual, proceed upward, and I think that's how we can kind of explain in a general descriptive sense the world we see around us, and also why our moralities are pretty comprehensible across a lot of cultures. The golden rule is actually pretty general, and you go to China, you go to Japan from France, and it's not like they're totally weird aliens. I mean, they do certain things differently, but the basic human morality is still there. The basic human ethics is there, and that's because we are human. And as Terrence said, I am human. Nothing is alien to me.
So,
But I mean, coming back to the way you're suggesting this, Razib, is that there's a cohesiveness. So, I mean, there was sort of a theme that you were talking about a couple, uh, almost cultures, a few, I don't know, millennia back, and then at the end, you came back to we all recognize ourselves as humans. So it's like there's cohesiveness. It has nothing to do with well, not entirely, of course, because we're all humans, but there's relatedness, but it doesn't actually have to come down to kin selection.
No, I don't believe it does.
Yeah, so it's a they're well, I mean, what is kin? I guess it's a covariance between what we recognize rather than some sort of theoretical entity of R that
Yeah.
was generated in Hamilton's original construction. So that would be the only part that I would disagree with. Well, not disagree, but maybe I agree with.
Can I ask this of you guys in a different way, which is if you take the notion that man invents God and actualizes morality that way, can't you also get to the end conclusion without the intermediary step? What's the intermediary step? God itself, right? If ultimately the end state is you're creating a system of morality and you've managed to say this is valid because it was given to us by God, if you take the position that that's a creation of man, you can also still arrive at the system of morals without God.
But that's the whole point. Man was driven to create it.
I mean, I think that God in quotes. I mean, like free market capitalism, democracy and individual liberty, might makes right. I think that those are also all God's like invisible, intangible, explanatory things that are unfalsifiable, that create systems of morality that people then kind of very doggedly adhere to.
Would love for Professor Brian Keating, who's joined us. Welcome, Brian. If you want to weigh in, feel free.
Oh, I'm just enjoying the conversation for now. Very much appreciating it. So I'll lurk for a little bit longer. Thanks, guys.
Can I just hop in? So sorry, and add this extra layer that I think I omitted and maybe was not so present in this in what Razib and I said about the kind of biological evolution of reciprocal altruism, which is that since then a huge amount of work has been done on how tribalism is not hardwired, but rather it's a hardwired program to figure out what the rules, the morals, the rituals, the explanations of a tribe that we join are. And so then those things, the rituals, the explanations, the morals, those are things that can evolve culturally. And so there's been a ton of work on so-called gene-culture coevolution, and it turns out that, according to some accounts, and Joe Henrich at Harvard has written a couple of really interesting books on this, but Boyd and Richardson are other great references. The culture side is kind of way more powerful and also fast-moving and able to kind of go in all kinds of different directions.
I think while Brian gathers his thoughts and is listening and everybody's listening, this is actually maybe the most beautiful one that I've gotten yet. It comes from Chris, and he says, and I'm actually very interested in what the scientists, in particular genetic crowd, has to say about this. The comment is, Donald Hoffman at UCI runs these computer experiments on evolution, and his research has led to conclusions which suggest that an absolutely accurate and perfect understanding of the environment is not the epitome of fitness. It's actually better to have only somewhat accurate in your internal representations of reality. Sam Harris and his wife, Annika, interviewed him, and his conclusions draw an interesting parallel to religion. Basically, the suggestion is that although religion may be an inaccurate representation of reality, it may confer better fitness. In that sense, a truly secular society that sees things extremely logically might be less fit/adaptive and therefore not the ideal state that we might think it is. And that kind of reminds me of what Raziv said very in the beginning about, Raziv, I think you were talking about being in Bangladesh, and I think you were referring to family or something. Does this make sense to you in some way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up as a teenager, reading The Blind Watchmaker and having kind of a scientific viewpoint, reality and the truth and all that stuff is like, that's my crack. Like, I love that. But the more and more I've like learned about evolution and biology, and just like, cockroach has been around for a long time. Like, what's its model of reality? What's it thinking, right? Like, it's just a replicative program. It's a reproductive program. So, Eric Kaufman wrote a book, Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth? Like, I think over 10 years now, 10 years ago. It's a good book. It's a demographic book. There's ways you can disagree with it, but it's basic logic, and I think this is true looking at the evidence, is that, yes, secularization does happen, but if you look at all the way across societies, there's no society where secular people within the society have more children than religious people. Now, there are societies where it's pretty close, but in a lot of societies, religious people have more children than secular people. So, I mean, there is some evolutionary advantage here. I don't know what it is. I mean, it might not be due to religion. It might be due to, covariance between religion and other things. But this idea that you need to have a perfect idea of reality is obviously, I mean, also, like, if you over-optimize things, sometimes you're not very robust to changes in the environment. So this is what I was saying when you're tracking the environment and you specialize and optimize your fitness for this, like, these local conditions, these temporarily local conditions, you can have changes, and then all of a sudden you're not robust to the changes. So, I mean, this is actually an argument between sexual and asexual reproduction, where it's like asexual reproduction can be really fit locally, but sexual reproduction, even if it's slower in the short term, it's more flexible. And so I think you can think of, religions and cultural systems in that way, where they can be functional adaptations, but they're not like perfect, but they have flexibility within them. And also, Joe Henrik, I would recommend everybody read Joe Henrik's work. It's great. And also Michael Muthukrishna, one of his students. But some of the stuff he talks about is, there are taboos, there's religious customs that encode tacitly and implicitly functional adaptations that the people don't even understand why they're doing it. And so this is something, this would be a conservative argument for religion, in terms of religion has within it adaptations and functions that we don't rationally really understand. And it's kind of like, kind of a Hayekian view, I would say, maybe a Burkean view, but I think it's a reasonable and coherent view. And as I said, like, obviously it's not for me because I don't personally believe in religion, but in my own life, I will say that I respect religious tradition a lot more, partly because it's been around for a long time. So I don't want to go into the whole Lindy Man thing, you know.
Fair,
But
fair.
there have been like thousands of years for some of these traditions, and so I think the very fact that they continue and persist is evidence, as opposed to just reinventing the wheel.
I'm thinking that the religion may have come as a way for us to learn to manage our tribal tendencies and transcend them. And sorry.
The pup
But
got in
Razib,
between.
isn't there a historical point where religion is technically overfit and is essentially adapting to data now?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that. Religion is not one thing; it's multiple things. So there's millenarian religions. Religions can become part of irrational herds. So I mean, like, I perhaps like the classic example would be like the Hosa millenarian religion, which insisted that the Hosa kill their cattle, because if they kill their cattle, then there would be, like, the white man would be defeated with magical powers. Obviously, that didn't work out. It resulted in a massive famine, and so that shows how, like, religion can lead people astray. So I'm not, same thing with communism. Great idea. E.O. Wilson said, great idea, wrong species. Like, he's referring to ants, right? So humans have all these ideas, and we make a lot of mistakes, and we learn from the mistakes. And I think one thing as I get older, in terms of adaptation and learning, we just need to understand that we have to have a little bit of humility here. Now, if you're a religious person listening to this, you could say, well, how do you know that the world is, the way your science defines it, and there's all these mysteries and stuff like that? That's a reasonable point. I don't personally agree with that, for various reasons, but this isn't about, like, my own views. It's more about how the world actually works out there. And, for a lot of people, religion is an excellent cultural scaffold. Now, Raza, you did say something about, how we, and I'm going to end quickly, but, we do have laws, rule of laws. We have things like credit rating agencies. We have things like blockchain and the ledger. There are functional ways that a lot of religions adaptations and functions may be offloaded to other things. Like, that is not impossible. I think the main issue, the stumbling block that I have over that, a lot of people seem to have really strong intuitions about religion and really strong emotional attachments to those intuitions, which I don't personally share, but that is what it is. And so if you want to change that, that's going to be a really deeper project.
I mean, the antidote I might add to that is, so coming back to the sort of very prominent evolutionary biologist is like Dawkins. So again, the God delusion had this huge effect of discussion, at least. And again, the premise was there's this misfiring. There's a misfiring of genes because we, as humans, had this history of being in small, I guess, villages or societies, and so religion grew up around that. And I remember when Dawkins visited the university I was doing my PhD at, and there was this optimization idea. It's maybe associated with sort of not machine learning. What is it? Game theory. So he had this idea that there was, again, this misfiring. But as Razib mentioned, there's clearly these communities where that's not working out. So the question that was asked during the sort of Q&A was basically, what about the Mormons? The Mormons have basically a reproductive capacity that's far above, I guess, non-religious groups in the U.S. or even a lot of religious groups. So, and Dawkins just said, next question. So, from an evolutionary perspective, this idea of a secular versus non-secular society doesn't really hold up, at least in the present case.
I want to say something real quick. The General Social Survey, look it up. There's some questions about creationism. Creationists have more children than people who aren't creationists. So creationists are evolutionarily more fit than people who accept evolution. I've always thought that was funny.
It is.
Agreed. I mean, it's absolutely true.
Who was talking about paradox earlier?
Ooh, wow. Okay. Well, this is a good moment to bring in another comment. Also, you guys have been sending really lovely questions and comments, many that I don't even agree with, but I like the thoughtfulness put into it. A lot of people also just plainly hate religion, so I love getting that as someone who's been trying to make a case for it. This comment comes from Zach, and this is for the AI crowd, so I'm going to give it for everyone who is involved in this work. The question is, will continued use of artificial intelligence lead to a more secular society as faith in artificial intelligence becomes more prominent? Does it make it more possible? I personally don't think so that's going to happen, but also I'm not in AI, so what does the AI crowd have to say?
Lex dropped down, right?
Spending a lot of time in this field, being on boards of companies and have invested in multiple AI projects. Today's version of AI, I would say, is not anywhere near that idea. And I think sort of generalizing to the concept of automation being able to get to a certain level where it can make decisions autonomously, it is quite likely that it would be able to make a series of decisions on behalf of people, as well as lead to new innovations that I think are fundamentally going to reduce reliance on religion.
Probably because it's going to murder a lot of people, but that's just my opinion.
I think it's going to cure more diseases in the next 10 years to 15 years than we have in the last century.
So, as a non-AI professional, I agree, Raza, that AI will help accelerate a whole bunch of scientific progress, but it won't help us at all with the questions that science cannot hope to answer. And the AI question, right? It just comes back to this thing. It's like there are a certain set of questions that science and the scientific approach can absolutely answer, and there are some questions that science will never hope to answer. And the question I wanted to ask Lex when he was here, and it was an assertion, it was a good one, fair enough. I mean, he basically said, look, there's beauty in science. There's the mystery can be unmystified through science. I agree, but the question is like, which are those questions that science will never hope to answer? There are some that just cannot be. And then the question is, well, what is the system that will hope to answer those set of questions, and then how will that and those things coexist? I mean, I'm just going to posit that, like, simply, has anybody got an answer that says no, science will answer all questions of any question that you might answer? Nobody on this stage believes that, or do they?
I think my point is simpler, which is that if you introduce certain systems, certain resources,